Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Jose Antonio Bowen. Jose Antonio served as Dean of Miami University, and he does innovation, leadership, pedagogy, consulting, and training in both higher education and Fortune 500 companies in the healthcare, energy, automobile, and telecom sectors. He has been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and Newsweek. And today we will speak about his latest book, Teaching Change: How to Develop Independent Thinkers Using Relationships, Resilience, and Reflection. Jose Antonio, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm very glad to be here. Thanks for having
So,
me.
Jose Antonio, before we get to the topic of the book, I wonder if you could share some information about yourself. How do you get this eagerness to teach and share knowledge with students? I saw your CV, you have so many certificates. I just don't even know where to start.
Well, I've always been curious. Uh, I have a lot of interests, and I realized at some point that a lot of my interests were in process. So I like cooking, I like sandcastles, I like music, and I like jazz in particular. And so all of those are ephemeral. All of those are things that go away. You make the food, you eat the food, it goes away. You have to do it all over again. And so I realized that part of my interest uh, was in processes and creative processes in particular. So that applies in a lot of fields. So it applies to my music students. I realized from a very early time that I was not trying to get my students to sound like me, which is the typical role in the conservatory, right? We call it a conservatory because we're trying to replicate ourselves and our students. And I didn't think that was a very good idea. So, how do I help students find their own voice? That's a harder thing to do. So that applies in music, it applies in the classroom, but it also applies in leadership. It applies in business. Every organization, every company has its own way of doing things, and leaders are individuals. And so the real question is, how do you find your own voice? How do you build a process and a culture um, that will lead to the sorts of outcomes that we all want? And I'm convinced that quite a lot of the issues that organizations have. Well, Peter Drucker said it best. It's culture, right? Culture eats strategy every time, and that if you can get the right people together and create the right conditions, that good things happen, and that applies both to the classroom and to really any organization.
So, from early in life, you like the process more than the product. Is that what I'm getting? And if that's so, how can we develop also kind of like a process mentality of, okay, I did this, let's say a music piece, but how can I go to the process of developing other music pieces? Or how can I go to the process of changing and adding my own voice?
Well, it's not that products are unimportant, but you have to balance you have to think about process. So I'll give you an example. Meetings. I do a session on how to run a better meeting. And so meetings are the perfect example of both process and product. So when you do an agenda for a meeting, right, do you put verbs or nouns? Right? So verbs are things we're going to do. We're going to discuss, right? Okay, that's useful. But we also, at the end of the day, need a noun, right? We're going to produce, we're going to make a decision, we're going to have something that we did. Um, so people sometimes put all of the effort on the nouns. They say, at the end of the meeting, we're going to have this, 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 and this. We're going to have made these decisions. We'll have this report. And on the other hand, if you only do verbs, it's not, we're just going to discuss. Well, then you just discuss all the time. So the real secret is to say, okay, we got 20 minutes. We need to make a decision at the end of 20 minutes about which software package we're going to buy. But for the next 15 minutes, I want divergence. I want discussion. And so what I don't want is that we get to the solution too quickly. So the problem most people have when they set up a new project team is they say, well, here's the problem I need you to solve. So the first thing human beings do is say, well, let's think of some solutions. Let's brainstorm solutions. But my first question for project teams is not, here's the problem you need to solve. Okay, eventually you got 6 weeks, 6 months, you got to solve this problem. But the first thing you need to do is to come back in 2 weeks and give me a better understanding of the problem. Tell me what I don't know. Tell me what misunderstandings I have. Challenge my assumptions that this is the problem, because what I'm asking for is divergence, right? Creativity, innovation. So as the leader, I'm in charge of the process. And so, yes, I do want a better product. I want a better thing in the end, a better solution. But in order to get a better solution, I have to make sure that I give people time to confront their assumptions at the beginning. And so, and everybody knows that you don't want someone at the last minute to say, "Oh, I have a new idea." You know, no. I wouldn't. So the reason that happens is because you've been learning for 8 weeks. And so what I need to do is figure out a way, how do I get that out in the first 8 minutes rather than in the last, 8 weeks down the line? And so balancing process and thinking specifically about process is going to give you better products in the end.
Okay, well, let's go to the topic of the book. How is it that you came out with the idea or the need to write this book?
So I think that there's a general assumption in education that we are teaching people content, right? We're teaching them stuff they need to know. But there's also an assumption that this isn't the end of the process. And that our students are somehow through osmosis are learning how to think for themselves, and that when they leave our classrooms, they will not only have more content, they will also have process. But we assume that the process happens sort of magically, and it turns out the data tells us that doesn't really happen. That students have learned our content; they're good at that. That's what most school is about. But if I say to you, okay, the way I taught you how to do accounting has now changed, right? We have AI, we have computers, they're going to do this. You don't have to do that anymore. So I need you to rethink your job. Oh, that's a lot. And so we have to be more explicit that as teachers, we want to make ourselves obsolete, right? That our goal is to have students no longer need us, which is a weird thing, but that's what our goal is to have you graduate when you can now decide for yourself whether your piano piece is ready to play or what's true, right? When you're in my classroom, I tell you what's true. This is a fact. That's not a fact. But when you graduate, the goal should be that you now can tell for yourself, oh, I'm not sure that's a fact. You've said that's true, but how would I know how to check that and understand how these things work? And most importantly, now that I know what these facts are, what's true, how do I challenge my own assumptions? How do I change my thinking to adapt to new situations?
And isn't that dependent a lot on personality? Let's take the accounting example. So some people in the accounting area will be thinking ahead of time. Okay, so I see my job is going to be automized sooner or later. I'm already thinking about the next step. But there are other personalities that are already fearing and trying to prevent change as much as possible. And you see this nowadays with governments trying to retool employees and teach them new skills, but they say, well, I've been in mining for 40 years. I'm not going to start coding now. Or, it's just some people have that fear of change and some other people are already signing up for the next classes. So I believe that depends a lot on the personality of the individual, no?
No, there's no question that some people are more open to change than others. There is a component of personality, but if we're going to have an equitable education system, which means that we prepare everybody to do well in the future, we have to make sure that everybody is prepared to change, because the world is now a world where change happens more rapidly than it used to. So it used to be 50 years ago, you could say, here's your job. You've learned these tools are going to last you a career. You can spend your whole career doing similar kinds of things. That's no longer the case. Most of the jobs of the future are unknown. Even in 4 years, students who go to college and get a major in 4 years, the truth is that most of the jobs, in fact, most of the good jobs especially, are happening every 4 or 5 years, we have no idea what your jobs are going to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years. So it turns out your major matters less than it ever did, right? Because and in fact, accounting, by the way, I pick on accounting because according to one study, an Oxford University study, accounting is the major that's most likely in the future to be useless, because it's numbers. It can be done by AI and computers. And so, right. And I don't know, it's a prediction, who knows? But the point is that there are no guarantees. You cannot say, well, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, because robots and artificial intelligence may end up doing that job, or the job may simply change because our assumptions were wrong, right? Our assumptions about how this type of machine works, or about the fact that we need coal, or or whatever, right? So it's the technology may not have changed for coal mining, but our need to use coal has changed or will change. And so so the ability to be agile and to be flexible is more valuable than it used to be. So you're correct that personalities do affect people's ability to change, but we also know a lot more in general about how to get people to change, right? So for this book, I did a lot of work looking at how do you get people to stop smoking? How do you get people to lose weight, to go to the gym, to floss their teeth more, to vote more, right? So all of those people do work on behavior change. And so they've come to conclusions. And interestingly, a lot of the times they've never talked to each other, right? So I would be in these, really these journals that talk to other people about voting or politics. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is the same thing that people were saying about stopping smoking. So for example, if you want to stop smoking or you want to lose weight, one thing you should do is hang out with other people who stopped smoking, right? So if you want to stop smoking, you don't hang out with your friends who are smoking all the time. That is going to be very hard. If you want to get people to vote more, introduce them to other people who vote. If you want to get students to study more, you need to, having a roommate that studies turns out to be way more important than me telling you you need to study more. So the social aspect, which is why the first R of my 3 R's is relationships, because relationships are key to behavior and to your willingness to say, I might be wrong, or I might have to change my mind.
Well, yeah, you are completely right. I decided to lose weight, and the first thing that I did was to not to go to dinner with my gourmand friends, and it has worked perfectly. But okay, so in your book, you put a lot of emphasis on continuous education and the idea that in an ever evolving world, things are changing constantly, and we had to reinvent ourselves. But I find it difficult to compete against the likes of Netflix, Instagram, marijuana smoking, and all these things that are all these industries that are investing millions of dollars to capture our attention and to distract us from actual learning.
Well, there's no question that we are now in an attention war. I remind you, the phrase "pay attention" is an important phrase, because the first word is pay, right? It costs something for me to pay attention to something. So if I'm paying attention to Netflix or to social media, I'm not paying attention to something else, right? So we also have something that's called residual attention, that if you check your email quickly, you lose something, right? Even though it's the switching that's really bad, going back and forth. So all of these distractions are a problem, which means that one of the new things that's really going to be important for people is managing your distractions, right? Being able to say, I want to focus, I'm going to close my computer, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to turn off email, those sorts of things. But you're absolutely right so human beings have what's called a limited cognitive load, right? We're only able to do so much at any one time. So this is a long-term problem, right? It's the source of bias and other shortcuts in our thinking. Human beings we get about 11 million impulses per second, and we can process a tiny fraction, 30 or 40 of those, right? So there's all sorts of information coming in: light, sound, touch, temperature. And so most of that we ignore, just like most of us ignore most of our email, right? So the question is, oh, I ignored that email. I was supposed to read that one. That first step, the triage, turns out to be really important. What information we pay attention to. And one of the things that I discovered is that, right, the same things that cause bias and cause us to have problems with diversity and equity and inclusion are the same things that disturb us in learning to change, right? That we ignore signals, right? We take shortcuts and we assume things about people. And so it turns out that we first decide if I like you, and then I decide if your facts are true. And most human beings think it works the other way around. We think that I'm going to be rational. I'm going to examine your evidence. But in fact, what we first do is I look at the way you smile. I look at how tall you are. I look at your skin color. And then I decide, oh, I like you. I want to be like you. And that then determines whether or not I think the evidence you're presenting me is true and whether your facts are good. So it's important for people to recognize that relationships, again, precede reason, that we all think we're rational. And that's a very dangerous position because you're not rational. We're primarily, right? Our emotions guide where we pay attention, right? Your question about attention. Emotions are why they guide what we pay attention to. So if we don't pay attention to our emotional intelligence, we miss lots of clues and we think we're being rational when what we're really doing is saying, oh, Elena's got things. I like him. What he says must be true. I'm going to act on that. But this woman over here, I'm going to ignore her. Or this person over there, I'm going to ignore their information because I don't think it's true. But the reason I don't think it's true is because I don't aspire to be like them. I don't share cultural heritage. They don't smile like I do. All of those things are getting in the way of my being reasonable. So step one is understanding how the brain works and how shortcuts work, and that relationships and emotions are actually guiding the rational part of our brain.
Right.
Go ahead.
So and also another thing that you put a lot of time and effort is on the idea that we have to be open-minded, that we have to able to accept change. But in our society, if you are, let's say, open-minded and you accept change, you are also considered to be a flip-flopper. And of course, we pay a high price for that, especially if we watch the news and we see politics. We see, oh, this scientist last week say, don't wear a mask. And now this week he's saying, wear a mask. And he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a flip-flopper. Or the same goes for a politician that changed idea from one issue to the other. Now his credibility is totally destroyed. And that happens to us in regular life. Oh, last week you like red. Now this week you like yellow, and you are not reliable.
No, that's exactly right. And there is a public perception problem. And so, in fact, you mentioned masks, which I think are a good example, because the truth is there's a huge advantage to a scientist who is flexible and adaptable. If you are a scientist who says, well, I said that this was the case last week, then right, you are never going to win the Nobel Prize. In fact, we know that Nobel Prize winners tend to be, right, the research they tended to be younger, right? That the research that you do is when you're 20 or 30 and you go, I think everybody is wrong, right? If you think about if you have children who are adolescents, right, that there's an adolescent urge to think, I know better than everybody else. Everybody else is wrong. I think there's a totally different way to do this. And so this is true in science. It's true in business. It's true of, Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, right? That a lot of these people had their best ideas when they were younger, and they were willing to challenge the authority of everybody else and say the status quo is wrong, we're going to change how we do things. So once a scientist, and this happens actually to all of us, all human beings, but all scientists especially, as you get older, right, you get faster at certain kinds of things because your brain literally has white matter. It has pathways that say, oh, I see this, I see that, right? So what we often call expertise is really an ability to see patterns, right? So seeing patterns is good. We say, so like if you're a firefighter, that's a great example, right? I'm a firefighter. Ooh, I don't like that beam. That beam's about to fall, right? That's really useful information. We recognize. So in some jobs, recognizing patterns is really, really useful because when this happens, that happens. But in science, that's a huge problem because that means that you're just going to replicate all the results. It means that you see what you wanted to see. It means that you find what you wanted to find. And so you're not going to have big breakthroughs. And so to really do science well, you have to say, I wonder if all of the work that I've done in the last 30 years, that all of my career, I could be wrong. I could have been looking at the wrong thing or making the wrong conclusion. I was just finding what I wanted to find. That makes you a great scientist, but it does make you look wishy-washy in the public eye, right? That people are convinced that, well, certainty is good. And part of that's because human beings are hardwired to see certainty as reassuring. Here's what we're going to do, right? 10,000 years ago, we were hunting mammoths. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to hold the spear. You're going to run behind the mammoth. When you're going to jump out of the tree. That's the plan. Not, well, I'm not sure what we should do. What do you think we should, right? That process, right? I don't like, right? So we like certainty. We like people who look confident, right? In fact, one of the things we teach people is that if you want to have more influence at work, you should appear more confident, power poses and talking with confidence. And so if I say to you, I am absolutely sure this is true, more people are going to, ooh, he sounded confident. I'm going to go buy that product or do that thing. So it's useful in marketing, but it's really bad in science. And so I think we lost an opportunity during COVID to explain to people that the way good science works is we don't want certainty. Because if I say I'm 100% sure, then I miss the next big thing. Or if I say to you, I'm 100% sure that it's impossible to make an iPhone, then you're not going to make it right. To make a cellular device that's going to be this big and it's going to go next to your head and it's going to be right. So think about the light bulb, right? Thomas Edison was one of dozens of people who applied for patents for the light bulb. But the problem with the light bulb was that it only lasted for a few seconds. That, right? The idea of running a current through a filament in a vacuum to produce light, a lot of people had that idea. But Thomas Edison said, you know what? In order to make this work, I need two other things. One is I need a filament that lasts longer than 2 seconds. And so he hired hundreds of people to test different fibers. Turns out that Japanese bamboo was the right, that lasted for 1,000 hours. So my light bulb lasts a lot longer than yours. But something else was needed. He needed an electric company that could get electricity to houses all over the country. Holy cow, that is a huge leap from the light bulb to saying, well, light bulbs are only going to be useful if I have electricity in every house. I'm going to need to set up an electric company. So people often get stranded with, part of an idea. And so if he had said, well, look, I got this light bulb. This is good. This is good. All I need to do, we wouldn't have the great invention that we have. So in fact, there's a difference between innovation and invention. Innovation is a new idea, but an invention means I actually bring it to market. I actually make a difference in the world. And so in order to do that, you have to keep questioning your assumptions. Is this light bulb enough? Do I need anything else to make it work? And so great scientists, great inventors, great marketers, great business organizations are all people who are willing to say, suppose we have it all wrong. And that goes back to where we started, which is process. How do we make sure we're not assuming too quickly that we know what we're doing?
From your book, also one of your stated goals is to make teachers more and more irrelevant. So to develop critical thinking, for us to ask ourselves questions, to do our own research. How can we keep this hunger going for the rest of our life instead of, okay, one day say, I know enough about this subject, I'm just going to take my knowledge for granted and I'm not going to bother anymore in learning anything new?
Well, one of the ways that we do that is that we build ambiguity into the way that we teach. So, teachers often say, well, here's the right answer, or this is what, this is the way to do this. And it turns out that if you say, well, here's what we used to do, right? So let's say you're teaching CPR. oh, well, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And here, so once I learn how to do it, then I'll know forever. Well, okay, if you teach it that way, then students are always going to do it the same way. But we know that there are always going to be new, right? Oh, there we have a new technique. Someone has just figured out there's a new way to do this that's a little bit better. Well, the way to get me prepared for that is to teach you, here is how we use. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is this is how we did CPR 60 years ago. This is how we did it 40 years ago. And notice how it's a little bit different.
Mm,
Here's how we do it today. This is the thing that we think is best today,
mm,
but in fact, there's probably going to be a new way to do it next year. Or think about this. How about surgery, right? We're going to teach you how to use a scalpel, right? So, but if you were A plus top of your class in scalpel in medical school 20 years ago, and you said, well, there's all of this new laparoscopic surgery that doesn't use a scalpel. No, no, no. I'm good at a scalpel, right? Like you said, I'm invested. I have learned how to use a scalpel. I'm going to keep using a scalpel. Well, I have a colleague who doesn't use a scalpel at all. Everything he does, he's learning, practicing new techniques to figure out how to do all sorts of things without making any incisions in the body, this new laparoscopic surgery, right? So maybe he wasn't very good in medical school at the scalpel, right? But the point is that when you get good at something, you get invested in it. And so part of the secret is to make sure that people know that when you learn things, that we didn't used to teach this. We didn't used to teach surgery that way. We taught that this way, and we're probably going to teach it differently in 5 or 10 years, so that you add ambiguity to everything that you learn, so that you don't think, well, this is certain, this is always going to be true, because it wasn't always true. It wasn't true in the past, and it probably won't be true again in the future. And that's a much better way to think about the world, is that my assumptions may be good, they're the best assumptions I can make today. And speaking of masks, right, we had a new report out yesterday that had new information on masks, because we've been wearing masks for longer. We now know that they have a 53% reduction in, right? So we didn't know that because we had never tried it a year and a half ago. So we needed to have new data. We needed to keep an open mind to be able to discover whether or not they worked or not, and how well they worked. And now we know more than we did 2 years ago. And the truth is, that's true for all successful living creatures. All successful living creatures learn. And that's how we got to be here in the first place.
Well, one thing that your book does is to help us keep that open mind. Jose Antonio, can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you do?
So the book is called Teaching Change, How to Create Independent Thinkers Using Relationships, Resilience, and Reflection. It's published from Johns Hopkins University Press. That's the easiest place to get it at the moment with all the supply chain issues. It's also on Amazon and all of the usual places. I also have a website, josebowen.com, and you can get a discount code for the book when you go to my website, josebowen.com. And there's also other tools there for teachers. If you're a teacher, you can download things that you can use in the classroom and templates and that sort of thing.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.